I want to start with a quote from the great contemporary spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle. You know, he's written so many books and articles that I could just read paragraphs from for this particular lesson about radical acceptance. But here's just one small quote. He said, "Whatever the present moment contains, accept it as if you had chosen it." Whatever the present moment contains, accept it as if you had chosen it. So if you were asked to radically accept this present moment in your life, could you do it? Could you possibly accept everything going on around you? Could you stretch your mind to believe that it is possible to accept everything that happens as if you had chosen it? That sounds pretty radical, doesn't it? Now you know why I use the word radical acceptance, because that's what I want to talk about today. You see, there's awesome power in accepting everything in your life, because it is only through the door of acceptance that you can find peace. And only in peace can you begin to change your thoughts and see different possibilities about where you go from here. So a friend of mine and I were talking earlier this week about radical acceptance. You know, when I'm doing a talk, I'm talking about it, right? So we were talking about accepting things, hard things, as if you had chosen them. And she surprised me by sharing an impactful story of the power of acceptance. And I hadn't heard this story from her about her life. And she gave me permission to share it as a part of my lesson, even though it is one of the hardest moments of her life. So here's what she shared. She shared that she had received some really pretty big gifts after radically accepting something that all of us as human beings would find very hard to accept. And she shared that due to some kind of like poor choices on her part at age 18. So how many of us make stupid choices at 18, right? So she found herself at that age, after these choices, out on the town, pretty intoxicated, in the middle of the night, separated from her friends. And she was tricked into getting in a car with two men in the military who said they had been told to take her home. Had been asked to take her home. And so basically, she was kidnapped and she was raped in a violent situation that was way beyond her 18-year-old control. And thankful to be alive, she said that she just wanted to go home and hide after it was over. I could completely understand. She wanted to pretend it didn't happen and basically run away from the experience immediately. I could completely understand how an 18-year-old would think that that might be the best and only option, right? However, she was strong enough and brave enough, and she accepted what had happened and figured out the best step forward. She called a cab, she got to a hospital, and let the team of professionals there help her make her choices. And that's the important part of the lesson. But just to give you some closure on the situation, my friend pressed charges and got extensive medical and therapeutic help that she desperately needed in that part of her life at that time. This violent situation was the doorway. And now, with hindsight, she can see that she had to walk through that doorway to get what she needed. And I might add, she continues to bravely go through that doorway whenever she gets to that level in a relationship where she wants to share that story. She walks through that doorway again and again to get the love and support and attention that she needs, that we all need in our lives. Acceptance led her and continues to lead her to her power regarding that experience that she had years and years and years ago. Acceptance that night led her to reach for help instead of crumble into self-blame and shame. Acceptance now allows her to see her part in the situation that happened without being embarrassed or ashamed at typical 18-year-old behavior, and separate that from the violent pathological behavior of the men involved. And it has taken her years to identify the blessings and the personal strength that grew out of that experience, that were hiding inside that really hard experience to accept. Can you see the power of radical acceptance just in that one story, right? Can you see how this radical acceptance might play a role for you in relationship to your own life? Maybe there was something that happened long ago or last week that you just can't accept, and therefore you never got your power back out of it. Because you see, as souls that we are, we're here on this planet to have very big, impactful human experiences, and some of them are absolutely huge, obvious delights. They're mountaintop experiences. They're good things, full of joy, and we can all agree that these are acceptable. Those human experiences are easy for us all to accept, right? But then there are these really huge challenges, things we consider bad, that come up in our normal human lives, and we have a much harder time accepting those too. Guess what? Our souls basically say, bring it on. Bring it on. Because if we came here as souls to grow and learn and evolve, we have to accept the experiences that are in our lives to grow us and teach us and evolve us radically. It's all winning. Just as Derek sang in Daniel Laine wrote. What if the game is over and we all automatically win? It doesn't matter what moves we made in the game, we all win. My friend grew and learned and evolved through that horribly hard, very young experience. And she keeps doing so as she shares that experience in her power. Would she have chosen those events to happen? Hell no. None of us choose the hard stuff. Right? Absolutely not. It's a nightmare of a thing. But she had the wherewithal to step through it, thereby accept it, and take her next step towards healing. That's what I'm talking about. Radically accepting anything to get your power. So what is going to be your hardest stuff to accept as if you had chosen it? Take a deep breath. So in preparing for this lesson, not only did I collect that story, I went digging. I want some juicy stuff about radically accepting. I don't like to bore you, right, actually. So remember, our theme for July is imperfection. If we're going to embrace the imperfection in ourselves and other and in our lives as a whole, we have got to adopt a mentality of radical acceptance that perhaps nothing needs to change for us to be okay. So as I was digging, I found this podcast on NPR called Invisibilia. I don't know if I said that right, but I think so. And this episode that I was reading about was called The Problem with the Solution. And this was a discussion about another thing that we find really hard to accept, and that is mental illness. So this was a discussion about the treatment of people, the solutions for people with the problem of mental illness. And if you know anything about mental illness, it's difficult to accept. And if we accept it, that would be radical, right? But what would happen if it was accepted? So this podcast was about a woman named Ellen Baxter, whose older sister became violent in a psychotic episode that she had. She actually went through one of the doors in their house with a knife. And so the sister was very aware of this and watched this happen. And her family knew that that was not acceptable, and so they put her in a mental hospital here in the United States back in the 1970s. And when the family, including the sister, went to visit her a few days later, she was medicated out of her mind, and she was basically totally unresponsive. And Ellen Baxter was appalled at the treatment of her sister just a few days after she had had this episode. And so Ellen spent her life exploring various treatments and living options for people with mental illness because it personally touched her life. She accepted this was one of her challenges to look at. And she did a lot of research. And one part of her research, she actually made the extreme choice to be personally hospitalized in a mental hospital by going undercover. She had one of her professors work with a psychiatrist to get her a diagnosis, to get her in the hospital so she could do this research. And she publicly exposed the lack of therapeutic practices happening in mental institutions. And then she began researching treatment options not practiced in the United States. And her travels led her to Geel, Belgium. G-E-E-L, Belgium, to the town of about 35,000 people, where they had been taking care of the mentally ill for centuries. So Geel happens to be the place where Saint Dymphna, I think I'm saying that right, the patron saint of the mentally ill, was martyred, and a chapel was built in his honor. And this town had become known as the paradise for the mentally ill. See, because people with mental illness, because he was the patron saint, would make these pilgrimages to this little town in Geel, Belgium, and the townspeople would take them in, and they housed them and fed them lovingly. And this practice continued from hundreds of years ago. I didn't write it down. He was martyred hundreds of years ago, and it continued this practice of housing mentally ill people. And in the 1930s, over a quarter of the population in Geel, Belgium, were neurodivergent, successfully living with families in that little town. So Baxter was fascinated when she got there herself, and she began studying this practice. She actually got a grant to go live there to learn about it because she was unbelievable. The average stay of a person with mental illness in a family was 29 years.
Oh, wow.
And some of them had been there more than 40 years with the families living with them. And so she was interviewing these hosts privately about their experience, like away from the people they were housing. And none of them said it was a burden or a problem. And she was baffled. She's like, have I just found a city of angels? I mean, how is this possible? And she said it was baffling to her until she heard the story of a man she called the Buttons guy. So every day this guy, in his anxiety to handle his mental illness, he would twist the buttons off of his shirt and his clothes until they fell off. And every night his host mom would sew the buttons back on so he could twist them off again the next day. And Ellen Baxter said, Mom, have you thought about sewing them on with like a fishing line or something? And she's like, why would I do that? I have accepted that button twisting is what makes him feel better. Why would I take that away from him? I accept that is what he needs. And after hundreds of interviews with the hosts and their boarders, they've never called patients, she realized something phenomenal. There was a radical acceptance of the person with the mental illness. The person's own families and their own doctors wanted a healing. They wanted something to change. They wanted a solution. But the host families and the psychiatrists in Geel, Belgium, they didn't need the odd behavior to go away for them to be okay. Baxter said that everywhere she looked in Geel, there was simply acceptance and a peaceful collaboration between those without mental illness and those with it. And since that time in Geel, Baxter has come back to the United States and worked to replicate that acceptance here. creating living environments where the mentally ill live in communities of safe people that accept them. And if this story is interesting to you, let me know and I can point you to that podcast. It was really interesting. But there's something powerful that happens when a person reaches a state of acceptance and stops resisting what is. So back to what Eckhart Tolle said, whatever the present moment contains, accept it as if you had chosen it. Could you look around your life and accept everything in it as if you had chosen it? Could you consider that something deep within you did choose it, did choose your current circumstances? I'm not saying that you're going to be able to remember a conscious choosing of the totality of your life, but I believe that our souls did choose our path, that our human selves are free to choose things or change things. However, the power to change a thing only comes when we accept what we've chosen up to this point. And to begin radical acceptance, we have to first start accepting our own personal humanity and all that it means to be living as us. So Thomas Curran, he's an author and a professor in London who's seen actually as this leading expert on perfectionism. And here's something he wrote about the topic of acceptance. He said this, and it's a long quote, so just be patient. He said, I think it is really important for us to recognize that we are imperfect human beings. We're exhaustible creatures, and we're often going to encounter setbacks. We're going to find that there are times in our lives where we're vulnerable. Things are going to happen to us that are completely out of our control, and that's okay. It's about understanding and recognizing that the world is unpredictable and that existing as an imperfect human being inside that world, it's okay to fail. It's okay to show vulnerability. It's okay to push ourselves out into the world, knowing that it might not always go to plan and that we might not reach our goals in the time frame we expected, but that's okay. Man, Thomas Curran talks about words we do not like to hear. Setbacks and exhaustion and vulnerability and unpredictability and failure, and basically things might not go to plan efficiently. Those are hard things to accept. Can you accept all those things as simply part of being human? Can we trust spirit is connected to our very essence and that if we can relax, things will unfold for us? Trust. Trust is a big word. So I found this entry in my journal. I journal on the computer and I love it because I can search by word for what I've written about something. So I searched in my journal, trust. That this was written I wrote this in 2010. And so that was a year before I got my practitioner license. I got my practitioner license in 2011. So it was 2010. And this defining trust was part of my practitioner studies. And here's what it said. My definition of trust is the radical acceptance that whatever comes into my life, whatever happens without exception, is perfect and right for me. That's what I wrote. Me. This means that when I am in complete trust, with a capital T, everything is okay because I know that everything is good. I can relax and allow my life to unfold at the pace and in the direction it is unfolding. Trust is the lack of resistance to what is. For when I accept what is, I'm no longer wishing for or reaching for something else, with my ego pushing God aside to control or direct the events. That's what I wrote in 2010. And over the years, I've practiced and practiced accepting that my ego doesn't have to drive every situation and that things are unfolding exactly as they should. I wrote that if I trust, I have a lack of resistance to what is. So think about this. You have done the best you could do. You have evolved as far in this life as you could to this point. You chose what you chose. You lived as you lived. You loved as much as you were able to love. You took every circumstances and made out of it what you were able to make out of it. It's all good. Breathe that in. The practice of daily radical acceptance would be to do that every night as you go to bed. The day was exactly as it was. Period. I did the best I could do with what I had from where I was. Tomorrow's another day and I'll wake up and choose again. Every day as a human being is imperfectly perfect. Wow, right? And I'm not saying you have to leave everything as it is. I'm not saying you have to look at everything and say, oh, done. No. Without making changes or adjustments or whatever. I'm saying that your power lies in accepting where you are right now, changing your thoughts about it now in the present moment. Now is the time to change your thinking, change your life. Ernest Holmes has some clarity. He says, our thought does not go out to influence person or things. What it does is readjust our consciousness, our own thinking, to include a larger and more harmonious field of action. That's Holmesy kind of writing. Yeah. We learn that when we get our own consciousness straightened out, things in our external world adjust themselves to meet our new and better inward awareness. The harmonious field of action is only available to you by accepting that something bigger is happening than just what I can see with my human eyes. We interact with this harmonious field of action by choosing to find the best possibility in everything we encounter. And we've got to shift our thoughts to adjust our own consciousness to a point where we know that we're okay with things just as they are. Remember I said earlier that some of our human experiences are peak moments full of joy and all of that, and some of them are hard. And some things are just completely unexpected, and we get to choose which way to go with it, right? And in that moment of accepting things as we are, we come to our point of power, and then we can choose. But the key is getting to that with acceptance. And Susan shared this wonderful article with me this week, and it perfectly illustrates what I'm talking about. So this is a blog post by a writer who publishes under the name Dr. Lori, and this is what she writes. It's titled, Where You Go, I Go, Joy and Sadness Together. And this is what she wrote. Okay, so we had a Barbie-themed bridal shower for my niece. Yes, there were lots of pink clothes, pink flowers, beautiful table settings, a stunning cake, a well-appointed bar, and food table. Even the swimming pool had a floating speaker that played Barbie music, and the ice cream truck provided many pink treats. It was simply Barbie beautiful, just as my niece wanted it. And then, out of nowhere, the sky opened up and it began to pour. Oh. The guests ran inside for cover and crowded by the door, hoping the rain would end. And my sister and I were running around trying to save what we could of the bar area as the fruit and the sugar packets were floating in a puddle. I felt terrible. This was different from how the magical Barbie shower was supposed to go. And just then, I turned to see my niece and her fiancé jumping into the pool in their finest Barbie outfits. The rain kept pouring and they kept laughing. I looked at my sister, mother of the bride, and quickly dismissed my fleeting thoughts of my freshly colored hair, my shrinkable sequins dress, and my non-waterproof mascara. We grabbed each other's hands and went into the pool. Our guests seemed stunned, but within a few minutes, folks of all ages and dress styles joined us in the pool. If the guests had any thoughts about the fact that none of them had a change of clothes, there didn't seem to be any towels, or the fact that many had a long drive ahead of them in wet clothes, they must have dismissed them for that moment of impulsive joy. One by one, and sometimes two by two, they jumped into the pool. That moment of pure, unfiltered happiness reminded me just how important it is to embrace joy whenever possible. As adults, we often hide or dilute our joy. We're afraid of looking silly, or even worse, we superstitiously believe that if we get so happy, the next shoe will drop. as if something terrible is waiting around the corner to remind us of the sadness, anxiety, and fear that exists in the world. It's a way of bracing ourselves for disappointment, as if hiding joy will shield us from impending sadness. This belief leads us to suppress our happiness, thinking that we can avoid the jinx of future misfortune by doing so. But here's the thing. Joy isn't about pretending sadness or anxiety doesn't exist. It's about accepting that the two emotions are walking together. Just like the Disney movie Inside Out 2, joy says to sadness, yes, of course I'll go with you. Wherever you go, I go. Joy sustains us and gives us the strength to face tough times, while sadness can give depth and meaning to our experiences, making moments of joy even more precious. By embracing joy, we not only feel better at the moment, but we also set ourselves up for a better mental and emotional health in the future. So the next time you find yourself holding back joy for fear of feeling foolish or feeling like you're tempting fate, waiting for the next shoe to drop, don't overthink the moment. Remember, life is full of opportunities for joy. They're all around us. We need to see them, embrace them, and sometimes even create them. Joy is our emotional oxygen for the next round of stress, worry, and sadness. So the next time you feel happiness bubbling up, don't hold back. Let it shine, knowing that joy and sadness can walk hand in hand, making life satisfying and more meaningful. That was from Dr. Lori. Isn't that a great story of acceptance, right? Acceptance brings you to a choice point. And then what do you choose? So to summarize my lesson, 3 things. 1, radical acceptance means that nothing needs to change for you to find your spiritual power. Accept the hard moments to find your greatest power. And number 2, accept everything that comes with being a human as if you chose it. Because the reality is your soul chose to be human, as messy as that may be at times. And number 3, accept the unexpected, and in accepting, look to find your joy. Each moment has the possibility of good in it, perhaps even joy. But first, you have to jump into the pool and embrace the moment as it is. Will you join me in prayer? Here's what I know. What I know is that through the doorway of acceptance is our power. That each one of us as a soul chose to be human with all the experiences that come with being human, with being part of the human race that is complicated at best. And I know that we each have that power to choose, and that from this moment forward, we have an awareness that if I accept something, I can change it. I can manifest something out of that, create something out of it, draw my good to me that is always available. I'm so thankful for this opportunity to share these thoughts and walk this path with this beautiful community. In love and gratitude, I let it go. And so it is.
So it is.